And joining us now is TSN hockey analyst Craig Button. Craig, thanks for joining us on the Hockey Hub.
Yeah, my pleasure to join you, Adam. I mean, hockey is such a bedrock in the Boston, New England area. So it's always a pleasure to participate with such passionate fans and such a great history of hockey.
Yeah, and those fans are wondering what's going to happen with this Bruins team at the trade deadline. A lot of anxiety, uncertainty among fans here in Boston. Certainly don't know which path they were going to take a month ago, but it seems like it's coming into focus now with the team currently on the outside looking in the playoff picture, only 2 points back as we record this, but still, Don Sweeney the other day addressing the media said the team was going to take a cautious approach and sort of compared it to years past where the team was maybe in first place or high in the standings where they would be a little bit more aggressive. I'll ask you, what does a cautious approach mean to you in this context?
Well, so cautious to me means you got to recognize where you are with respect to what your team has shown you. Let's not forget that in, 8, 9 years ago, the Bruins missed the playoffs in 2 consecutive years. And, that was coming off of a lot of success. And then they retooled it, and we know how good they've been in the period since, including losing that game 7 to St. Louis in 2019. But they've been a top team. I believe managers have to look at the team as it is, not as they hoped that it would be or as they thought it would be, but as it is. Hampus Lindholm, who's a solid defenseman. Reports are not back for the year. We do not know what the situation is going to be with Charlie McAvoy. So right away, you're looking at 2 defenders that are instrumental to any team's success to be able to move forward. And Don Sweeney knows what the report is on Charlie McAvoy, but as you're trying to make up ground, you don't have them. So you understand that we have some injuries that are really, really hampering our team. And now you start to see where you're at with respect to what your team is. Hard time scoring. We look at the defensive play, which has been really good at times and really off at times. And then we think about the game Tuesday night. I mean, there had to be all kinds of joy in Boston. They're up 3-0. They're playing well. Toronto storms back to make it 3-3, and then boom, just like that, it's 4-3. And then you lose a point by losing in overtime. I think the Bruins have shown exactly what they are. I don't think they're a contender. I think they have some flaws. They have some injuries that are going to really hamper them. So I think that Don Sweeney has to look at the team with respect to what are we going to do to try to position ourselves to not be in this spot next year. They don't have a lot of high-end talent, a lot of high-end skill. That's where their offensive struggles come in. So how do you try to look to improve that? It's not just at the trade deadline. It's also leading into free agency, and we know that the cap is going up. There's certainly for the 3 years beyond this year. So I think it's always been about Boston being a contender. Don Sweeney has the experience of having gone through this previously. I think he's in the exact same spot.
And you sort of wonder how aggressive the Bruins will be at the trade deadline in terms of a possible sell. And the name that's come up that's raised some eyebrows, of course, is the captain, Brad Marchand. He's an unrestricted free agent at year's end. What's the likelihood that the Bruins deal their captain?
Listen, I just can't picture Brad Marchand wearing anything other than 63 in the black and gold. I can't get it in my head. I close my eyes. It still comes up black and gold 63. And when we think about the Boston Bruins, to me, Brad Marchand embodies everything that the Boston Bruins have been and stood for decades. And certainly I can't see that. Now, when you look at what Brad Marchand is as a player and what a difference maker he is and still is, there's no doubt that there's teams that would be fully interested in adding Brad Marchand to their team. And even Brad the other day talked about, playing meaningful games. And he doesn't want to be part of a rebuilding team. He says, you're just kind of playing a game and you don't have anything to play for. And he says, whether that's trying to play for the playoffs or play for a Stanley Cup or whatnot, meaningful has different, connotes different things depending on where you're at. No question that Brad Marchand would garner tons of interest from the contending teams. And at the same time, is this a path that Don Sweeney wants to go along? I think what Don Sweeney has to be able to do is evaluate, okay, I've talked to you, Brad. How do you feel about the potential of moving and playing somewhere else? He says, I don't want to play anywhere but Boston. You have to factor that in. And then Don has to look and go, what are the offers I'm getting? Is it just an offer to get something for Brad Marchand that's not going to really help us? And do I run the risk of hurting a relationship that's been so strong? And these are the things that happen behind the scenes, but I think those are the important areas that you have to investigate and have the discussion. You just have to have the discussion with Brad and go from there. And it may come down to Don Sweeney goes, Brad, we got ourselves in a spot where we're being offered something that's going to really move our team forward, that's really significant, and we really have to look at doing it. And at the same time, Brad goes, okay, well, that's a good team. Okay, I'll try it, and we'll talk in the summer if we want to resign here. Those are real conversations that are necessary in this situation.
What do you think the possible return could be? What would Don Sweeney do if somebody said, "Hey, here's a first-round draft pick for Brad Marchand"? Is that enough? What would be a good return for the captain in your estimation?
So there's different levels of first-round draft pick. There's top 5, there's top 10, there's top half. I have to believe that Brad Marchand is not going to any team that isn't a contender if that's the path he wants to go down. So now that becomes a late first-round draft pick.
Right.
So that's really a second-round draft pick. Does that really help you? I mean, we know that having more picks are better than having less picks, but at the same time, excuse me, you have to be very careful with just trying to go, oh, we got a first-round draft pick. Well, if it's 29th pick, that's just not something that's going to be part of your franchise here, at least for the next 3 or 4 years.
And in terms of some of the other players that have been mentioned, Craig, and take your time to clear your throat, by the way. That's fine. We got plenty of time here on the Hockey Up Podcast.
I'm good.
In terms of some of the other players, right? You had some unrestricted free agents, some restricted free agents. Morgan Geekie is playing very well. He's an RFA. Trent Frederick, is an unrestricted free agent, although he just took a hit from Jake McCabe on Tuesday night. So there's an injury situation there. You have Charlie Coyle, another year left on his deal after this year. Brandon Carlo still has a couple of more, but his name's been bandied about. What names do you look at on this Bruins roster and say, all right, that's a prime candidate to get dealt at the deadline?
Well, I think that the unrestricted free agents, the 3 that you mentioned, I don't think the 2 that you mentioned, certainly Frederick and Geekie, they're going to garner a lot of interest from outside Boston, and teams should be interested. I mean, a healthy Trent is a hard, heavy player. The playoffs are hard, heavy hockey. That type of player is somebody that teams want to add. You want to be bigger and heavier and harder to play against. Morgan Geekie has that size. He has some scoring ability. He's not going to go in and play on your top line, but you add him as more scoring depth. There's teams that need a little bit more scoring and would benefit from that. So Morgan and Trent, I think, are going to be very highly coveted players. Charlie Coyle and Brandon Carlo are kind of a little bit different. A lot of seeds for trades that happen leading into free agency are planted here at the trade deadline. Somebody phones Don Sweeney and goes, would you be interested in trading Brandon Carlo? And Don goes, geez, I'd never really wanted to think about trading Brandon Carlo. And certainly with the uncertainty of Charlie McAvoy and knowing Hampus Lindholm isn't coming back, you don't want to leave your blue line totally empty and throw the young guys to the wolves, so to speak. So, but if you're a team, Brandon Carlo has a great contract. He's a really good second pair defenseman. And teams that are trying to improve their blue line, not just for now, but into the future, are going to be very interested in Brandon Carlo. But that trade may not happen until the free agency period is looming. So when you consider that type of player, there's no question that Don Sweeney will field some calls on that. I don't see it happening, but seeds can be kind of planted. And the same thing with Charlie Coyle. Charlie Coyle is what I call a flex player. He can play on the wing. He can play in the middle. He can play in your third line. He can bump up. He can provide some scoring. Again, with 1 year left on his contract and the certainty with the salary cap going forward for 3 years beyond this year, I think that gives teams a lot of confidence to say, well, we can absorb that contract, or we can add that player. And what are you willing to give? And there's going to be some teams, and it's different for Brad than it would be for Charlie Coyle, but a team that's saying, hey, listen, we need to make the playoffs. We want to be in a playoff spot. I'll give you an example. The Utah Hockey Club, they win against Chicago, they beat Vancouver, they put themselves back in a pretty significant fight for the playoffs. Would they be interested in a Charlie Coyle? Would the Toronto Maple Leafs be interested in a Charlie Coyle? They're looking for a right-hand centerman, and they're trying to push ahead in the playoffs. I don't know if Boston wants to trade with Toronto, but those are two different scenarios where there would be absolute interest in Charlie Coyle, and I think both those teams would be very happy to add that contract for the next year.
Let's look at some storylines across the league, and the hockey world was stunned back in January, late January, with Mikko Rantanen going to the Carolina Hurricanes, a blockbuster trade. But the two sides have yet to figure out a contract, and so he remains unsigned beyond the rest of this year. Is it possible the Hurricanes could actually move him before the deadline?
I think it's possible. They paid a pretty significant price to acquire Mikko Rantanen, with the idea that Mikko Rantanen was going to help them go deeper into the playoffs, because that's the goal for the Carolina Hurricanes. They've been a good regular season team, but trying to get over that playoff hump and get deeper into the playoffs is where they're headed. I don't think there's any question that Mikko Rantanen is a player that can help you do that, and certainly adds all the elements you're looking for. But you look at what happened last year with Jake Gensel, and that's fresh in the minds of the Carolina Hurricanes management and ownership, and they're going, well, geez, it didn't work out for us. We gave up a lot. Maybe we can go back and recoup some of what it cost us to get Rantanen, and because we don't want to just again give up what we gave up and then lose him for nothing. I get that argument. I'm a big believer is you made a bold move, and the move was one that I think was strong. Don't start layering it with what happened with Gensel. Start looking and going, we're trying to focus in on right here, right now. And do we believe that Mikko Rantanen can help us do that? Because if you look at it and go, well, you know what, we want to get something back for him, and, we can't sign him long term, then why did you do it in the first place?
That's a good question, and I'm sure a lot of Hurricanes fans are asking that question as well, Craig. Another name that's being shopped around, and it's actually a team that's going to come to Boston on Thursday night, is Brock Nelson, the New York Islanders. What teams would be interested in him?
Yeah, well, War Road, Minnesota, I joke about this, Adam. War Road, Minnesota, I call it a suburb of Winnipeg, Manitoba. It's just across the border. War Road, I don't know if you know this, War Road used to play for the Canadian Senior Hockey Championship, and in their arena, it's a great arena, a lot of great history with the Christian brothers, and Dave Christian, who happens to be Brock Nelson's uncle, played in Winnipeg. So, and Brock knows that. I think that Brock Nelson would be an absolute perfect fit for the Winnipeg Jets as a second line center. You have Scheifele, who's a great player, number one. Then you have Adam Lowry, your number three. He just slides in there. He's got the back end of Lowry and the front end with Scheifele. I can't think of a better scenario for the Winnipeg Jets than being able to get Brock Nelson in there. Big, strong, heavy player, scores in tight, scores on the power play, leans on you, and he takes some of the pressure off of the top line. I think they need some size in their second line, and I think that Brock Nelson would be able to add that. And Winnipeg Jets have been a fantastic story, and I think that we know what's happened in last year's playoffs. This is a good team, but I think it needs some reinforcements, especially on the second line. And I think Brock Nelson would fit perfectly.
Just a couple more things to get to. The Penguins and their situation on the outside looking into the playoff picture right now. Kyle Dubas, according to The Athletic, citing a source, said that he would trade Erik Karlsson in a heartbeat. And you look at what's remaining on the contract, you might understand why that's the case. Is that a possibility?
I think it is. When we watched Erik Karlsson play in the Four Nations tournament, I think he was. I call it vintage EK65. I mean, he was brilliant for Sweden, and some players, I'll go back and reference Brad Marchand. They're wired to compete. They're wired to play in games that matter, and then you put them in a situation where, and the players, I always say this, Adam. The players always know, and they always know first. The players in Pittsburgh know that they don't have a chance to make the playoffs. They're going to play hard because they're competitors, but they know. And so you watch Erik Karlsson, maybe not be as invested, and people go, "Well, that's not the type of player you want." No, when you put Erik Karlsson, just like it is the case with the vast majority of players in a good environment, they get to a spot where they're more inspired, and then all the best of their play can come out. We saw that in the Four Nations. Pittsburgh would have to retain salary on Erik Karlsson to trade him, but we're talking about a difference maker when Erik is on his game. And if you want to just look at a small sample size of the Four Nations and see what he can do, and actually, Erik's really played well from what I would call first 25 games struggles where he was really poor. I think he's played very well since then. And certainly, if you can get a team, if you can get Pittsburgh in this case to be able to take on a big portion of the salary, retain it remaining. I think Pittsburgh's on the hook for 10 because San Jose's still on the hook for 1.5 million. So you get them to take of that. And I'm going to go back to the certainty of the salary cap. 3 years going forward, you know what it is. So you can say, hey, listen, Pittsburgh, you pick up 3-4 million of that. We got a player at 6-7 million that can be a difference maker. I think there's every reason to believe that Erik Karlsson could be moved. But Pittsburgh's going to have to do their part in terms of retaining salary.
And finally, just some of the other storylines that we covered a number of them, of course, Craig, but is there anything else that you're looking at, any in particular teams or players that could be moved before the deadline?
Yeah, we talked about Rantanen a little bit.
Right.
The Colorado Avalanche are a team that I'm really trying to gauge where they're headed because they made the moves for the two goaltenders. They felt that their goaltending wasn't good enough. They made the big trade for Rantanen. Last year, they traded Byram for Middlestat. I don't think that's a team that's at the top end of the contenders in the West. And certainly they want to be in that market. I don't think they're finished. They're a team I'm really watching closely to see what they can do because they make a significant move again. I think they can lift their team into a better contending spot. The other place I'm looking at is the Florida Panthers. I don't know what the situation is with Matthew Tkachuk. I mean, obviously, he wasn't able to fully participate in the last two games with Team USA at the Four Nations. They have some free agents. I don't know what's going to happen with Sam Bennett, Aaron Ekblad. If Matthew Tkachuk is out for the year, is this a team that says, hey, listen, we're not going to be able to do what we want to do in terms of competing for the Cup? Do they look to make some moves? And I'm talking about being sellers. And again, you start to look at what your chances are without a Matthew Tkachuk. I'm not going to say they're greatly diminished, but they're diminished. And I think that the LA Kings trying to add some offense, that would be the trio of teams I'm really paying close attention to.
Yeah, and you mentioned the Florida Panthers, a lot of miles logged over the last couple of years, right? Reaching the Stanley Cup final back-to-back years, and then without Matthew Tkachuk, you're really up against it. How much fun is this time of year, man? Isn't it so much fun? I love it.
Well, it's fun because teams, like you've watched teams and you've seen what they are, and in some cases what they aren't. Now those teams are trying to figure out what they can do to strengthen their team. They're also trying to figure out what they can do to make sure, in the case, and I will use the Boston Bruins, to make sure they're not in this spot next year. They want to be in a better place at this time next year. So all the things that lead into the trade deadline, what does it mean coming out of the deadline in terms of play, Stanley Cup playoffs? And free agency, I think, is going to be wild this year because we see the cap going up. We know it's up for a number of years. And I think that we're not just going to see like players signing as UFAs. We're going to see some significant movement with restricted free agents and some roster changes, which we didn't see during the last 4 years because of what I call the COVID CBA. Caps were maxed out. There was no room there. Now I think it's opened up. The ice jam is broken. Hey, we're in spring. Isn't that what's supposed to happen?
That's right. And spring training is underway for the Red Sox here in Boston, and the trade deadline is fast approaching, just over a week away. Craig Button of TSN joining us. We appreciate your time. Thanks for joining us.
Oh, my pleasure, Adam. Just a great conversation. Thanks for having me.
And that'll wrap things up for the Hockey Hub. Once again, thanks to Judd Surratt for joining us. We will see you next time.